So it's a pretty common scenario for applications to hold only a start and an end date for something that occurs over a period of time. Contracts being a very good example of that. From the application database perspective, you obviously wouldn't want to store a single row in the database for every single date that that contract is active. So they would store that as a start and an end date. From a Power BI perspective, you may want to then plot that information on a graph. Now, you obviously can do this as a point in time using the start and end date, and you can probably calculate a measure that works out for every single date what it is. However, it might be easier sometimes to just have the data persisted at an individual date level so that you can just plot that data in a graph and see what the value of your contract base is at a given point in time. There is a little trick on the Power BI side of things that we are going to walk through today that shows you how you can actually take your contracts and the start and the end date and convert that into a time series that then enables you to plot that information very easily on your graph. It should be noted that this should really only be used for trending purposes, because what we're going to do is duplicate the values in our data, but it's a way that you can then plot that data and see trends in it going forwards. So to do that, what we've got here is a very simple little Power BI book that I've set up. And if we look at this here, we can see that the data is something that I've created, which has two different contracts in it, contract A and contract B. So to demonstrate what we're talking about here today, what I've done is set up a Power BI book that has one simple table called contract dates over here. I've created the data by using the enter data function up here. And when I go and look at the data, you can see it's about as simple as it could be. We've got two contracts, one starting the 1st of January through to the 31st of January, and the next contract starting 15th of February through to the 15th of January through to the 15th of February. This is pretty common with data that you might see in your application systems, where you're going to have a start and an end date, and contracts will obviously roll over into the next period. And you'll get another start and end date and all of that sort of stuff. So you should be relatively familiar with the way that data is sort of structured. Obviously, you'll be getting a lot more data than what we sort of see here. It's obviously worth pointing out that we've extracted that through, or we've manually created that data, but you'll be using SQL connections or all sorts of different connections to sort of get the data that you're interested in. However you get that data, once you've got it into your book, the next thing to do is then obviously go into the book and change or go into edit the query. So once we've gone into that, the first thing to do is to make sure that your dates up here are in date format. They're not in date format, this trick isn't going to work because obviously behind the scenes the engine here is actually converting this into an integer, and we need to that integer in order to calculate the series between the start and end date. So firstly I'm going to transform this column into a date column, and I'm going to do the same with this as well. Again, depending on how you get your data, you might not need to do that step, but it definitely needs to be a date format, because the next step that we're going to do is add in a custom column. So when we add in the custom column, what we're going to do is create a column that has all of the values between the start and the end date in a great big long list. And to do that, it's going to pick up the integer value of the date that has been stored and create the list between it. So what we want to do is we can share the actual formula outside of this session. But essentially what we've just pasted in there is taking this start date as a number and working out the values between the start date and the end date as a number. So hopefully when I click this, the syntax is going to parse and we'll see that we get the value as a list. If we actually click on that, you can see that we have all of the dates listed here between the start and the end date. So if I then click here and expand to new rows, suddenly I then create a new row for every value in the list that was generated, which once I then convert this, if I transform this into a date, I then start to see the value for my contract persisted at each individual for each individual date. So you can see I'm running the 1st of January all the way through to the 31st of January in line with the contract A start and end period. So obviously once I've done this, I can then close and apply and I've got my data there. This particular model that we put together doesn't have a value for the contract, so I can't at this point sort of demonstrate putting that into a graph and showing you how that would work, but hopefully you can sort of see how by creating the a value that is persisted at each row, you generate the series and you can then plot that in a graph nice and easily. The other point to note is the compression engine on the Power BI side of things is pretty impressive. So creating this data, even if it creates millions of data points after that, it doesn't create a massive massive file that you need to then save in a different place or something like that. It's pretty efficient in the way that it stores it. So you could just use this to then store your data and sort of see what it is at any given point in time.